Hey viewers, the old fun wagon's due for some service. Needs some oil changes, so we're going to go ahead and change the engine oil. The transfer case had some water in it. I think I drained all the water out, but I'm going to drain all the fluid as well as get a sample. The transmission I know has a little water in it, so we're going to drain that and change it. We'll check the wheel bearings front and back to check for water contamination. And I did just grease all the zerks, but we'll go ahead and do that again. What I've been using for lubricants is the engine right now. I changed the factory oil for Redline synthetic. I'm going to change that out now with some TRC Moly Pro spec. I've started running this in my truck, in my top kick here, and it seems to do pretty good. I haven't hit the first 10,000 mile oil change interval to do any testing. There was nothing. I used to run Redline in that too. Nothing wrong with that, but the TRC comes with oil testing included, so we're going to see how that goes. It's in the same, basically the same price range, I guess, as the Redline stuff. Pretty top of the line oil. So we'll change the engine oil, put some Moly oil in it, and the Redline oil I've been running is not Moly. The Moly is just an extra bit of lubricant. We'll just see how it does. The transmission, the last change I put the Redline MT85 in. The correct oil for this transmission would be MT90 to get the 8090 spec called out, GL4. I ran the MT85, which is a 7585, because that's what I had on the shelf. We've had a lot of good luck with it in the New Venture 4500 transmissions. The OE spec for that was a 7585 GL4. I figured it's a little thinner, but not too much, so I've been running it. I'll send that off for testing too to see how it does, or if it's breaking down or anything. But I don't think we'll see any issues with that besides some water contamination. And I have not relocated my vent. Transfer case, I started using TRC Ultratech gear lube. It's GL4 and 5 rated. But the issue with GL4 and 5 is yellow metal compatibility is not part of that spec. So, I mean, technically I could run it in my transmission. I would possibly burn up my synchronizers. There's only one yellow metal bushing, if this will focus, in the transfer case, which is this bushing I've pulled out of another Roxor transfer case I have. Will it focus? No. So it's just yellow lined in a metal bushing. I don't know if that's focusing or not. There we go. I should probably cut this in half to see how thick that yellow metal lining is, but chances are you could burn that off and be fine. If something like that, does get cooked, I'll have some, all metal bushings made like this one. Yeah, the problem with GL4 and GL5 oil, GL4/GL5 oils is extra sulfur phosphate to meet the GL5 spec, and that is corrosive to yellow metals. What happens is it oxidizes, and when there's friction there, it burns the oxidation off, so that takes a couple mils off every time that burns that off. That's why synchronizers in the transmission burn up when you put a GL5 oil in them, if they have yellow synchronizers. If they have all metal synchronizers, you can run whatever you want in there. But we're doing some testing to see if sulfur phosphate affects this. And of course, the bronze metal in here, there's different grades of bronze. There's bearing bronze, aluminum bronze, all kinds of stuff, and they react differently to sulfur phosphate. I'm not a chemist. I guess I could do some research, but I'm just doing some real world testing, see what happens. And worst case Ontario, I'll just need to replace this with a metal bushing But I started running this because it demulsifies water, and in a previous video I posted, I knew I had water contamination. When I drained it, I saw a little bit of clear stuff coming out. It didn't really come out on the video that I showed, but I noticed that the oil was a very, very bright red. And if you can see in this hose, it's a very dark red. So we'll do some testing to see if there is oil or water suspended in the oil, and you know, we'll just kind of go from there. I'm not concerned at all with the performance of the oil. When I tried to drain the water off, it still felt, you know, great. When oil gets watered down, you can kind of feel it, you know, sticks more than it slips. But this, you know, when I tried to drain the water off, the oil felt fine. But we'll test it just to make sure. And then for the wheel bearings, I typically run this Castrol Pyroplex in everything. I mean, we've been running it for 20 something years in everything. Farm equipment, vehicles, you name it, you know, shop machinery. It's done great. I've used this in my boat trailer for years. The oil does, or the grease does get kind of thin, but I haven't lost a wheel bearing yet, which is more than you can say about a lot of greases. But with this, I've been trying TRC Paragon 3000 grease. It's good up to roughly 600 degrees before it breaks down, where most greases are only good up to 2 something, maybe 3 something. So I've been trying the Paragon 3000. This also is supposed to separate water, where this will kind of absorb water and get thin. This won't absorb water, and it's supposed to coat the metal so you don't have water droplets up against metal to create rust spots. We'll check for water intrusion in my hubs. I probably have some. Hope I have some. I was playing pretty hard here a few times. And then this Molly Paragon 3000. Molly is not good for tapered roller bearings because the Molly is as solid and it just doesn't get out of the way of the bearings when they're turning very fast. It's okay for ball bearings. Of course, ball bearings have very, very small contact point. But I've been using this in my slip yokes and my spring bushings because, you know, they're not high speed anything. For low speed tapered roller bearings, you know, in some equipment this would be okay, but for high speed wheel bearings or something like that, you typically don't want to have Molly in it just because it can't get out of the way fast enough, which could probably cause some pitting or overheating. I haven't experimented with it personally, and I don't want to. I'll just do my reading online, and that's what I come up with. So we'll just keep it to low speed applications and splines. So we'll go ahead and get this thing up on the lift and drain some oils and see what everything else looks like. Stupid dogs eating the snow falling off of this thing. Huh. Stupid dogs. I went ahead and mounted my new vehicle stabilizers. The Roxor's not quite long enough to need them, but I figured I'd try them out. We just got them, and solid as a rock. Doesn't rock. From front to back, we'll pull the locking hubs off the front hubs, check for water intrusion and to see how the grease is doing. While the locking hubs are off, we'll grease our RCVs with that moly grease, which meets, as far as I can tell, meets the spec that RCV lines out for what their axles take, their axle shafts take. Not too long ago, I already checked the differential oils front and back. They didn't have water in them, and we're not quite at the service interval for changing those for putting the 538 gears in. I think Spicer's recommendation is 2,000 miles, 1,500 or 2,000 miles. We're at about 1,300, so we'll keep running those for a little bit, and then we will change the oil for those. We will be changing the engine oil and filter and testing the engine oil. We will be changing the transmission oil and testing it. Oh, something else I want to point out is I took a paint marker and wrote what the plug sizes are, because I have so many vehicles that I can't remember what takes what size of socket or bit or whatever the case may be. So yeah, little tip, if you got a paint marker, go ahead and start writing on your vehicle. It might help you down the line. We will be changing and testing the transmission oil. Same with this diff. We're not gonna change it yet. It didn't look like it had water in it when I had it open a couple hundred miles ago. And we'll be taking the rear locking hubs off to make sure there's no water in those. And I do have locking hubs on the rear because I have the On the Rocks full float kit, and it seems to be working pretty nice. Reason I got it is if I got any kind of breakdown, I can unlock the hub and lock my ARB and keep going, pull whatever broken stuff might be that, you know, might be in there. With the semi-float axles, they usually don't break, but if they do, you know, your wheel and everything falls off. So I went with these as an upgrade, just so if I get into a pickle, I can limp out. So let's get started. So first thing we're gonna drain is the engine oil. It's a 22 millimeter socket. I had to clearance my factory skid plate a little bit to get this on. It shifted kind of in one direction. Probably wouldn't affect the regular chrome socket, but all I've got in this size is an impact socket. And we are going to collect a sample, maybe. I can get it spun all the way out of there without using a crowbar. Okay, we got our sample. Oh. And now we'll just wait for this to drain out. We'll move on to the next thing. All right, so we got the engine oil draining over there. I went ahead and cut open the filter. This is what they look like on the inside. And I don't see any metal in the filter. I'm going to run a magnet over it real quick. Doesn't look like the magnet picked anything up. So we're good there. But I thought just since we're checking everything, I know I'm getting a sample sent off and it'll say, you know, if there's much metal in there, but I figured I'd see for myself before the results came back. But that's what it looks like cut open. There's a little spring in the bottom to hold the filter element up against the end there. And there's your anti-drain back valve. And you can see, yeah, just a little, basically a rubber washer. So we'll go ahead and get this taken care of, and we'll drain the transmission next. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and pull the plug on the transmission. I've got my oil sample bottle handy. May get a little bit of spill over from this access hole on the skid plate isn't lined up exactly with the transmission anymore. I schmucked it a couple times. Didn't move too much, but just enough. It might kind of dribble on the pan instead of going right through that hole. But go ahead and take the plug out. Alright, I don't know if it's coming out in the camera, but it's kind of cloudy, a little dark. Let's see if I can use it around here. A little milky. Focus. Yeah, a little milky. Not too bad. And it looks like the way it's draining, the skid plate didn't move too much. So that's good. So we'll go ahead and get this sample bottle cleaned up, and it's a little full, and let this drain. We'll go from there. All right, going through the magnet on this. There is some shavings. See if I can get it to focus. There we go. It's not horrible. It's probably not bad at all knowing where these are made. You know, just tolerances aren't as tight as something domestically produced. Doesn't mean anything's wrong with it. But I'll just monitor it, make sure I don't get chunks that are too big, and yeah, I don't foresee any issues, but if there are some, then we'll just put a new bearing set in it. Hopefully I can, I haven't taken one of these apart yet to research what the bearings and synchronizers are, but hopefully I can get those parts individually, and all the gears and shafts and all that will already be broke in. All the rough spots already taken off. I did the same with I was going to do the same with the transfer case. I took the original one out of this, and I've got good domestic bearing kits ready to go for them. Got to finalize some paperwork on them before I make them available, but I never did get time to put mine back together, so I just got a whole unit and threw it in here. But at least that is figured out, and that was a similar story. You know, some shavings and a little glitter. But my drain pan is big enough. We can drain the transmission or the transfer case now at the same time the transmission is draining out. All right, so the transfer case drain is a square drive. I can't find my square drive set, but I have an old what is this, 5/16 hex that I flattened two of the sides off. It's not the best, but it'll work for now. It'll work at least until I can find my square drive set. Oh, I almost forgot. We need a sample jar. We got our sample jar. So this is also a little milky, which is kind of strange because this oil is supposed to demulsify water. And I know this design of transfer case does run extremely hot going down the highway. A lot of oils will just foam and blow them out. Actually, when I took the original one apart, the day after I parked it, it was still full of foam. The foam hadn't all broken down yet. So oil analysis should tell us if the demulsifying properties are being broken down or not by heat, or what's going on here, because this is quite milky. And on the video I posted a couple weeks ago, it wasn't milky. You know, I'd stuck my finger in the top, wasn't milky. I drained a little bit out for the video to hopefully drain some of the water off. It wasn't milky. I've since driven it, not too much, but you know, enough that it got warm, and now it's kind of milky. So we'll just see what the testing shows on it. But for now, we'll examine the magnet on the drain plug and we'll let this drain out. So we've got engine, transmission, transfer case drained. We've got engine oil sample, transmission oil sample, and a transfer case sample. And it looks like the magnet didn't quite hold on to everything. It had a lot of powdered shavings, just like the transmission did. I guess the transmission had a few more, a little bit coarse ones, but there's some shavings, some powder that came out of the transfer case, which is, you know, all this is kind of normal on a new vehicle, especially one, you know, something not German engineered and built, I guess. You know, there's almost no break-in cycle on a vehicle like that, where this with rough machining and I don't know if I want to say questionable precision, borderline questionable precision on some of the surfaces, bearing and seal surfaces, gear surfaces. You're going to have a break-in period for quite a while. I mean, even you know, most domestically produced vehicles, you're still looking at, you know, 2,500 minimum break-in. A lot of that does carry, you know, up to 5,000 miles for some things, even a little more possibly. And you know, during that time, you can still see a lot of this powder. This, I don't know how many, got a few thousand miles on it. Less on the transfer case, obviously, because I replaced that. Yeah, I expect the break-in interval for these before you start not seeing a lot of these shavings is probably around 10,000 miles or so. And of course your use will vary. But that's it for drain-in. We're going to leave the diffs alone for another few hundred miles. At that time I will also test that fluid to see what it comes back at. Now we're just waiting for things to drain off, and I'm going to send the samples in and see what they say. All right, with the oils out of the way, we'll go ahead and check the wheel hubs, see if there's any water in them. Oh, missed one. I can't count today. All right, take that off. Everything looks good so far. Take our snap ring off. Then we'll unbolt the main hub body. looks like it need a little bit more horsepower, so I'll be right back. All right, just loosen them with a breaker bar. So now we can go ahead and use this guy, finish them off. These, I've got Spicer hub spring washers on this, so they don't really, it doesn't take much to torque them, just enough to hold pressure on the spring. But as soon as that pressure is released, they come right out. Take the hub body off, and it does look like they got a little bit of moisture in there. See a little orange, no standing water. See if this will show it or not. It's hard to see in the camera, but there is a little bit of orange in there. See a little bit of white, like the grease did break down a little bit. So I might pull the hub off and get the grease tested to see if it's broken down any. But it doesn't really make any noise. It's, I don't know if you can hear that, it's just the brake dragging a little bit. It's not making any noise, so that's good. See my grease circ right here for my RCVs. I'll go ahead and put grease in there, and then cleaning the grease off around the splines where the shaft comes through the spindle. I don't see any evidence that water ever came through that, so that's real good. I came up with a fancy dancy spindle seal setup. Let's see if we can see it or not. Not really in the camera. Take the thing off. Tripod. Can kinda see, but not really, I guess. Anyway, I've got an upgraded spindle seal setup that so far I haven't found any reason to believe that it let anything in. It's kind of a two-piece deal. It gets rid of that metal slinger that's factory. It seems like a good idea, but it ends up being kind of a mud scoop. So I changed that up, and it looks like that part's working good. So that means that the leak has either been coming past a gasket, one of these gaskets in the hub, or past the O-ring in the dial, or past the bolts, which is possible, but I don't think so. Just looking at the holes, they don't really look like they've ever had contamination in them. And the holes aren't, the actual bolt holes aren't rusty either. But this is exactly what we were looking for. We wanted to see how much damage we did. We know our upgrade spindle seal is not the culprit. It's got to be something on the outside, which these are just fairly cheap mile marker hubs I've got on the front. And this is exactly why I put them on. I wanted to see what kind of abuse they would take. I did notice the last time I took these apart, I think I posted a video of that. I did, yeah. There was a little bit of slack between the steel gear and the aluminum housing. Doesn't look like it's really any worse, but there is a little slack there. You can see some wear. I'll have to see if I can get a close-up picture of that. Maybe take one side apart and clean it up. You know, now that I think about it, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of moisture through the locking hub. So it would not have been moisture through the cap anywhere. We're looking at just this gasket, which looks good, or the bolt holes, which don't show evidence that anything went in through them, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So we'll do a little bit more research on that, see if maybe an O-ring, you know, try putting O-rings on these, helps with anything, or O-rings in them rather. See if I can get a narrow-walled O-ring to go in there. I'm not sure, we'll just have to see, play around with it. But that's the front hub. No damage really, it doesn't look like, just a little water in there, which I don't like seeing. So now let's go to the back. Actually, before we go to the back, picking these parts up here, it does look like water got in past the gasket. You can see the flange is kind of rusty. When I made my last video, I did not change the gasket. So we will change the gasket, even though this gasket looks fine. We'll change this out just to make sure this wasn't the problem child here. Maybe even use a better material gasket. I'll have to see what I got in the warehouse here. But yeah, doesn't look like it came through the bolt holes. Looks like it came past twice used gasket. Apparently they're not as good as twice baked potatoes, I don't know. But let's head to the back. Okay, we're at the back now. But Warren Premiums back here. And they come apart the same way as the mile markers. So let's take those off. Oh, almost the same way. It looks like the Allen is a different head. That's why you do your homework before YouTube. All right. All right. This one looks good on the outside. And instead of a snap ring, this uses a bolt to keep the axle shaft from sliding back and forth. So we'll take that off next. Okay, that's off. Now we'll take our breaker bar to these bolts. Of course, none of them are tight. Okay. And the reason why none of these are tight is still kind of a mystery. These spring washers should hold. They held for the front. I know On the Rocks has Nordlock washers that come with it, these kits. And I don't know if they come with them. I know they're available through On the Rocks for these kits. I opted to try these spring washers because I wanted to see how much abuse they would take. And maybe I didn't have them torqued down correctly, it's hard to say. But I wanted to see. And I'll torque them down when I put everything back together. And if they loosen up again, I'll have to either go to Nordlock or do something different. I know on the front hubs, I had the clearance. I didn't realize my socket wasn't getting them tight because the socket was bottoming out on the hub body. But I clearanced them, so now a thin-walled chrome socket will tighten the front. I haven't had any issues with these. I never did check the rears again. I just looked at them and, well, they're tight. So yeah, we'll do a little bit more homework on that and see if the spring washer is acceptable for use where most of the power is going when you're driving down the road. But it looks like even though the bolts weren't tight, there's nothing, no water in there whatsoever. Grease still looks good, just like when I put it in there. That focus all right. And also the Warren does seal with an O-ring on the flange versus the mile markers used at Gasket. They don't have a deep pilot like the Warren, which that pilot would have been taking most of the abuse with loose bolts, and it still looks like it's in good shape. I do have a little tear in the O-ring here, it looks like, so I'll one there, so I'll change these. But it looks like even with loose bolts, the Warren hubs are the ticket. So we will get the flange cleaned up, and we'll put this side together, we'll check the other side, and we'll go from there. So I was going to take the other side apart off camera. I just took the rear locking hub dial off and see a red tint to this fluid. So I've got some differential oil that leaked in past the seal there. The only reason why you'd have a seal leak with you know, low miles, relatively low miles on the seal, is either the vent is plugged in the differential, which I don't believe this one is. It's usually pretty clean underneath, you know, way underneath where the vent is. Or possibly when this axle shaft was installed, it had a little burr in it and tore the seal a little bit, which I'm gonna guess is what happened. Or when I put the seals back in, this one was crooked, which I don't think happened, could have happened. Anyway, I'm not worried about it. The only reason why you don't want oil to get into these hubs is because it kind of makes a mess when you take it apart. But other than that, there's no real reason why having a little oil in here is a bad thing. But just something I found, I thought I'd document it. Okay, now we're at the front of the other side. Well, didn't think I'd have to film this either, but I confirmed the culprit of water intrusion. You see right there, rust mark going all the way into the hub. So these mile markers use a gasket to seal instead of an O-ring like the Warrens. These gaskets have, these aftermarket gaskets have little cutouts right here and right here. Wouldn't be an issue, except the mile markers have reliefs in them. Save on material or who knows whatever. The Warrens, on the other hand, besides they seal with an O-ring, they do not have those reliefs. We do cut some gaskets of our own without these reliefs. The pilot's a little bit different. They're for a different application. The hole's the same, just the pilot's a little different. I'll see what I can do about getting our own gaskets cut for these hubs so we don't have this issue where these relief holes line up with the reliefs in the hub. On Jeep hubs, they've got a thicker wall right there, and it's not quite as big of an issue, I don't think. I put it up against the hub on the back, which is a Jeep design hub, and I don't think there was an issue. I'd have to actually, bolt something up and mark it to see. But I've identified that. What I'm going to do is I'll just, for now, I'll keep using these gaskets just for fun, and I'll fill these holes with silicone to kind of close the gap, and I'll leave the silicone, sticking up a little bit, and we'll just see what happens. I did see some rust right on the inside of the spindle here. I got a little bit worried for a second that my spindle seal upgrade had leaked. I got a flashlight and shined it down there, and there's no water or rust or anything down there. By the bushing, it's all just water that came in here and just dripped down right there. So spindle seals confirmed good on both sides. Just need a little work to get the gaskets to seal all the way. There's a bit of a chamfer on the inside of these hubs. A guy could probably put an O-ring there and seal. I'll look into that, but for now I'm just gonna put silicone in those holes and the mile markers and put these aftermarket gaskets back on. The factory gaskets from mile marker don't have those little relief cuts in them. I haven't checked to see if I got any of those yet, but we're gonna try a couple things. Keep running it with this oil or this grease. We'll coat the outside of the hub, the outer part of the hub on the inside with grease, to kind of keep the rust particles, glued down, because I really want to see what this grease can do. The bearings aren't bad. There's a little bit of brake drag, but bearings aren't bad. I can see the grease is a little bit milky in there, but we're just going to run it. We're going to just try some different fixes, different upgrades, see what happens. So I've got my worn hub taken apart, and one worn hub and one mile marker hub, locking hub taken apart. I wanted to check the wear that was on the inside, and we'll see if I can get this to focus or not. You can see between these grooves here that there is some ridges down in there. That's wear from the hub gears. There we go. You can see that the worn hub body has just about the same, if not a little bit less wear than the mile marker hub body. But the funny thing is, a lot of my drivings on the highway, I keep my hubs locked all the time, my front hubs, just for testing to see what happens. The funny thing is, most of the time the front hubs are not under power, and they still have at least as much, if not a little bit more wear than the worn hubs. And then the gears that actually engage the aluminum casting, the worn is quite a bit wider, maybe 30 or 40% wider than the mile marker. Contact area is very important when you're going from hardened steel to a pretty soft in comparison aluminum. The splined, the shaft gears, the mile marker does have wider contact points on this gear, but the teeth are narrower on the mile marker than on the worn on the inside. So that's kind of odd. I don't know why you'd put a wider gear here when you got nothing to hook to it. The rest of the parts are essentially the same. The Warn uses a spiral snap ring to retain the inner splined gear in the body. The only other major difference is the Warn bushing is a press-in, and it's much wider than the mile marker, which is not a press-in, which isn't too big a deal. A lot of the Warns and some other models are not a press-in, but the bushing is quite a bit wider in the Warn, and that's important because you have your axle shaft. The inside supported by the differential. The outside is supported by this bushing, but with no support on the outside, it can wobble around inside of your spindle just a little bit. And the wider the bushing, the more stable the material is going to be. It's not as prone to fracturing if your tire catches and puts a side load on it. So the Warn's got a lot of things going for it, but the wider bushing, wider contact area to the aluminum hub body. These teeth are narrower, but I've never heard of anybody shattering Warn teeth, or mile marker teeth for that matter, unless they were something super high horsepower and shock loaded it real bad. The worst part, the worst thing that usually happens to these gears is people pack the hubs full of grease, and then the grease gets all hard, and then the teeth don't engage all the time, or they don't engage fully, I guess, and eventually they'll start rounding off, and then they won't engage at all. That's the most common locking hub failure, is over greasing. But I did, while comparing these two, I did see something very significant. Notice something very significant. So we'll go over to the postal scale and check that out. All right, we're at our postal shipping station. This scale goes down into the ounces. The mile marker hub, and this is just the guts and just the two gears, the body, and of course the bushing. The Warn bushing's a press-in, so I can't take it out. So just to be fair, the bushing's still in this one. 1 pound, 8.8 ounces for the mile marker. The Warn, same thing, bushing, hub body, no O-ring. I took that off just to clean it, haven't put it back on yet. And then the two gears, 2 pounds, 6.3 ounces. So almost a pound more per hub, and that's not counting the springs, snap rings, the dial. That's just the stuff that matters, is almost a pound more than the mile marker, which is very interesting. And something else, now that I got it clean, the pilot on the mile marker is very shallow. I was going to try and put an O-ring on here to see if it would seal better than a gasket to go in the chamfer of the hub. That's about a 1/16 wide, which is how wide the O-ring is in the Warn hub. But you can see the snap or the O-ring groove there, and then there's just about that wide more for the pilot length. So the Warn also has a longer pilot, which is more stability when installed. Now that the locking hubs are back together, with just a few shots of moly grease just to keep them lubricated a little bit, not enough so they won't engage. Now they're put back together, I went ahead and compared our gasket that we have for these, where the pilot's a little different for a different hub application. It does fit the Warn. It also fits the mile markers, but there's quite a bit of slack, and the sealing surface right there is very small on these mile markers. If the gasket isn't centered perfectly, it actually falls off the edge, and it won't seal right there. What I'm gonna do, so I can maintain compatibility between multiple hub types and applications, I think I'll keep the pilot the same, and I'm gonna redesign these gaskets so that they fit the bolt hole a little bit better. I'll size down the bolt holes. I just kept them OE spec size, but you do have, the knife gets real close to the end, and it does on a lot of holes. You know, there's not much gasket to seal right there, which you don't really need down in the corner as long as you got something up around it. But I'll resize the holes so they fit the bolts, and then the bolts will keep the gasket centered on the hub, and then when you put it on, you should have more than enough contact area. So we'll get to that this week here and get a new version of these cut, and then they'll fit these hubs and these hubs and all applications where these hubs take a gasket. So it took me a couple of weeks to wrap this video up, come up with some ideas for fixes, or solutions rather. For the mile marker hubs, I don't have time right now to redesign my gasket and get it cut. So in the meantime, I'm going to use a worn hub O-ring, as well as one that's quite a bit narrower material. They don't actually make this this small material in this size, so I had to build this O-ring out of cord stock. This one should seal the smaller one. I'm going to put one side the smaller one side the bigger one. I think this is too big and it'll just split when you tighten it down. But we'll get that tested up and see which one prevails. And if neither one prevail, then I guess I'll have to take the time and redesign a gasket for it. One issue I did run into doing just basic oil service is the crush gaskets for the engine drain plug and the transfer case drain plug. I actually ordered a set from Mahindra, a pair from Mahindra, almost a year ago to replace my used ones, and I just got them here in between shooting this video, and I thought, you know, just something to seal a plug. Probably shouldn't have to wait a year to get. So I've come up with some plastic ones. They're good up to 500 degrees. They fit both plugs great. We're gonna throw them on and give her the onion. But I made 100 of these, so these are available for sale now with quantity discounts. The bad part is, you know, shipping gets to be more than the parts, but if you replace them with every oil change, you know, you can go through, depending on how you drive, you know, you can go through a few of these a year. I know I probably will once I get into being able to drive this more. But yeah, we got a solution for some parts that, and maybe it just took me a year to get, I don't know, but we got a solution for parts that take a year for availability. So don't have to worry about reusing your old crush gaskets anymore, or coming up with something different, or winging it, siliconing it. Got you covered. The wheel bearing grease that looked a little bit waterlogged, I did not sample, but I sent some pictures to the manufacturer. They said it looked like just the dye had kind of rinsed off, and the grease still felt nice and tacky, like grease should feel. So we didn't change that. I did stick a little bit more in. There was some orange rust spots on some metal that I didn't have grease on previously. We're just gonna kind of glue the rust particles down, and we're gonna keep running this grease and test its performance some more. So remember the locking hub I took off on the one side and the back. The bolts were loose, and I didn't know what the deal was with the spring washers, why they didn't hold tight. The other side I did not take apart on camera. It was tight, just like the fronts were. So my guess is I did inspect just this side previously, several hundred miles ago. Just testing, checking things. I'm gonna guess that for some reason I just didn't torque the back down properly. All the other locking hubs were right, so we're gonna go ahead and keep running these spring washers because I think it was just user error. While we were in between here, oil results did come back. The engine, nothing major. Everything came out okay on it. It does indicate that I used redline oil on this test. That will be changing to a TRC product. For the transmission, it did indicate a lot of wear and also that possibly some dirt got in. We will be relocating the vent so that that doesn't happen anymore. The wear, and a lot of that wear could possibly be normal, just from a vehicle made in India doesn't have super tight tolerances on the machining. Nothing else too far out of line other than water, which we knew. That also does indicate a redline product. We will be changing that to a TRC product. Then the transfer case, besides some water, there wasn't too much out of whack on this either. I did see on all these that they had some metal stuck to the magnets on the drain plugs. Apparently none of the wear was so bad that it was suspended, besides in a little bit indicated in the transmission. So we will continue to use the Ultratech, TRC Ultratech product that is displayed on that. Well, that about wraps it up for what our goals were with this service interval. We'll put everything back together, try our improvements, try some different oils, take things apart in the future, check for any more water intrusion or dirt as indicated by one of these oil samples. We'll see how the oil testing comes out on this other oil. Should be perfect, besides continued break-in period. Yeah, we'll go from there. Thanks for watching. We'll see what the next video brings.